All right, I've done a little bit more of an inspection on these areas. I actually feel better now that we don't need Japanese paper repairs around those or strengthening around them. We could do it. It's basically a judgment call. Since this is my book, I'm going to make the judgment call. Before we get into that, this is the adhesive that was removed. You know, by volume, it's not actually that much, right? Like all these little specks are little rolled up adhesive crumbs, essentially. So I wanted to show you that. Between the carrier and that's all that it is left of the tape that was there. Now, regarding my decision of not to reinforce this at this moment, first off, you'll see tackiness is completely gone, 100% at both locations, okay? And what I did was I basically held this up to light and I looked through it. And while the paper is thin, and it does look like one arm of the staple probably was pulled through here, it punctured and then at least is a partial pull through. This also has an elongated hole on one side, which is kind of indicative of a partial pull through. The other arm has strong paper to grab on both of these staples, and there's still some paper to grab on both of the sides, even with the pull throughs. So I've made my decision. I'm going to not do a reinforcement with Japanese paper. I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this book using the staples that I've manufactured, or right now we have one. We're going to test it, see how well it works. If it works well, we'll make another one the same way. All right, we've got our cover reunited with the inner leaves of the book. Got everything pretty well lined up. We know exactly where the staples were because we had some wear. So I have just my really sharp forceps. These are number 5 forceps. And I'm just very gently putting holes where I know we need them. And then we're going to attempt to put our staple through those holes and see whether or not we can find the corresponding holes in the paper underneath. There's the centerfold. There we go. So I'm through to the centerfold on the bottom one. I'm going to keep covering the paper lined up best I can. Now, I can treat this like a staple we're trying to remove in reverse. And that is, we can stabilize one of the arms with this block and pin everything down nice and tight. And then we can bend the other arm over. And we can use a capable staple tool from Immaculate Comics to stabilize that arm while we push the other one down. And they are going to overlap a bit. We'll have to make a decision about that, whether or not we want to deal with it. These are obviously replaced staples. We do have a fair amount of overlap there. I'm going to remove them. We're going to bend the staple to give us a little bit more thickness so that it lays better down, and we're going to trim them. And what I am going to do, I'm going to use my micrometer to measure how much total we need to trim. And I'm measuring right now the overlap that we have. and it's about 200 thousandths. So we want to trim about a total of 200 thousandths. And I'm going to remove these staples same way that I remove any staple, with this Flawless tool from Immaculate Comics while we stabilize it. And then in reverse, stabilize this end and pull this up. Okay, so we learned a lot, and we're ready to adjust this staple to get it to fit just right, and then to make a second one that's going to work really well. So I'm just going to push that through, pull it from the outside. There we have it. I'm going to pull this out of the way for a moment, set it aside. What we learned is that we actually want a secondary bend up here somewhere that accounts for the thickness of the Golden Age book so that our staple will lay down. Right now it's bending right here, and that means that the arm is kind of, you know, we're getting an arm that doesn't want to sit nicely like that. It's sitting like that in the paper. We also learned that these arms are just a little bit too long by about a total of 200 thousandths. They're not exactly the same length, so we'll probably trim one of them a little bit more than the other. But also when we put that bend in, the secondary bend, this staple is going to, the arm is going to lay not all the way down. So how am I going to do that? As I mentioned before, I have this tool specifically for that purpose, and I'm going to go ahead and bend these arms down. I'm going to make a secondary bend like that. I'm going to do it in both arms. That will account for the thickness of the paper. And we're going to have a better staple for it. Okay? Now I can see approximately how much needs to be trimmed. I have my nipper tool, and I'm going to nip. I'm still going to cut a little bit less than what I think we need to cut, because I can always trim it again, but it's very difficult to add the material back on. Okay, that's what our staple is going to look like when we're done and it's installed. I can measure these arms, and I can cut them so that they really meet right in the middle. The whole thing should be about a 1/2 inch plus 20 thousandths, which is half the thickness of the wire on each side, so that's like basically perfect. So then 260 thousandths should be from either end to the end of one of the arms. If we want to leave a little gap, maybe 250 thousandths for each. So that tells us where we should make our cut mark, and it is just a tiny little nib off of each side. I did that so that I didn't get a little metal shard in the eye. I am wearing safety glasses. Okay, I'm ready to try that again. So we will straighten this back out and attempt to reinstall. Guess before I do that, real quick, I'm going to measure the length of the arm. 275 thousandths. That way when we manufacture, if this works well, I don't have to put it in and out again. We can just manufacture the next one to these dimensions. Okay, I think that's reasonable. So we'll go ahead and make the other staple to the same dimensions and install it the same way. All right, here's what the finished product looks like. We've removed the tape. We manufactured new staples. I think much better than these janky ones that were in there. We do have a slight amount of a tide mark that goes around where we remove the adhesive, but it was that or do a full soak at everything, which also has risks. We've removed tape. There's tape removal now. There's evidence of the tape removal. I'm okay with it. Again, full disclosure, it's an honest book. We did the same thing here with the staple. I like the arms. I like the way they're laying down. They're nice and tight now. In terms of the cover and the book, this book had a slight amount of spine roll, but it's actually because these staples are not placed perfectly in where the book was creased. This is the center of the book, and we know that the staples are offset, both of them. So I think it's kind of a natural spine roll. It doesn't detract a lot from the book. I decided that I'm not going to remove it. We use the tools that, we talked about before. We have the Capable staple tool from Immaculate Comics, Rick Morgan. We have this piece of Delrin that I machined myself with a little hole that I like to use to it does the same job, but just, in my opinion, a little better. It stabilizes the paper a little better. Bamboo, 1/2 inch width. That is the perfect width to bend, and then also this way, the perfect depth to give us a nice double bend in the staple so that the arms lay down nice and flat rather than being sort of sticking up in the air. If you don't use a tool like that, our nippers, and of course the actual material used for the staple is 24 gauge galvanized steel. So when the book is closed, it sits quite nicely. I will still press this, and I think when I press it, we'll get a slightly better alignment. We'll fix this slight misalignment here, but generally the cover is sitting where it needs to. If you see it from behind, again, we notice that slight spine roll, but the cover's sitting pretty close to where it needs to be. I may adjust it just a little bit that way to get just the right look. But I think we're essentially done with the book. I'll do a final press. That's not going to change the appearance all that much. We took a book that was color touched and had tape all over it, and we removed the tape, removed the color touch, deacidified the cover. left an alkaline reserve in the cover. We resized the cover just a little bit to give it a nice look and feel back to how we would expect a cover of a 75 or 80-year-old comic to feel. There were some costs to those changes. We definitely faded some of the original inks, but I think overall, for me, we improved the comic dramatically. We got it out of what would have been a purple label and moved it into a conserve status, reinforced it, deacidified it, and made it a book that's ready for the next 75 years of its life. So I'm very pleased with the results on this one. I'm going to wrap it up with this and move on to the next series. I've got some really exciting books coming up, so I hope that everybody enjoyed this series. And until next time, enjoy the hunt and take care of one another.